My first rotation was in residence at the Aurora Rush Copley. Here I followed a doctor who was in their residency and observed their everyday life. Here the doctor discussed the patient's diagnosis and treatment and discussed whether they would be discharged or if they have to stay longer depending on their health status. I really enjoyed this rotation because it had a ton of patient interaction along with different ages and diagnoses. I also learned in this rotation that the 21st century skills are a huge part of the medical field, like taking initiative, as the patient is relying on you for whatever they are there for. My second rotation was at clinic at the Aurora Rush Copley. Here I followed a doctor through their family medicine clinic and observed what it's like to work in a doctor's office. This was similar to residence but had some differences. At the clinic, patients have a scheduled time and they come in to get checked by the doctor. The doctor then makes 3 different trips. The first one going to get a better understanding of what's going on and then leaving the room to discuss a diagnosis and treatment with the head doctor. The second visit to go in and discuss the same thing with the patient, and the third visit being a discharge or anything that was prescribed. I enjoyed this rotation because of the patient interaction, but I also found that the everyday life of a family medicine doctor or even nurse was a little bit too repetitive for me. My third rotation was in the ER. I love this rotation because you are always kept on your feet and never know what's coming next. In this rotation, I observed an ER nurse and learned all the responsibility of everyone in the ER. In this rotation, there was a ton of patient interaction, which I appreciate very much. Here I even got to hold a 3-year-old little boy who had cut his face from the corner of his eye to the end of his hairline and was in need of stitches. I also learned in the ER through an experience in my residence rotation because of a code blue what kind of a team effort it is through everybody working on that floor. Here is also where a 21st century skill came in, communication. If not everybody is on the same page in communicating what is going on with the patient and what needs to be done to the patient, something is going to go wrong and it's going to fall on you. My fourth rotation was ATI physical therapy. In this rotation, I had the most patient interaction and was able to become more of myself and adapt a little easier as I understood what patients were going through. I found from my past experiences and my experiences through physical therapy that each patient is there for something different, whether it's due to injury or maybe even just old age. And that to me is unique because that differs their treatment and recovery from somebody else's. Also at ATI, I was able to observe a little bit more freely and connect with patients a little easier through their time there. My fifth rotation was cardiac rehab. At cardiac rehab, I sat behind the desk with the nurses and observed the patient's monitors. Cardiac rehab is like physical therapy, but for someone who has suffered a traumatic heart incident, whether that's a heart attack, heart surgery, or maybe just an abnormality in the heart. Here I learned that for 6 weeks, 3 times a week for 1 hour each day, the patients would be working to gain strength back in their hearts while being monitored to make sure everything is working properly. This rotation had patient interaction, but not as much as I would have liked, and I also found that the patients tend to be a little bit on the older side, which is something I do not prefer. My sixth rotation was lab. Here I observed a lab tech and learned how to test blood and urine. In the lab, they are looking for any abnormalities that are red flags towards a patient's diagnosis or just to help get a better understanding to why what's happening is happening. Here I got to take somebody's urine and test it for pregnancy and also got to do a cell count under a microscope. Lab had 0 patient interaction and was very, very repetitive, which I dislike. My last rotation was radiology. Radiology was one of my favorite rotations as I was very intrigued by all the different ways to look into somebody's body. In radiology, there are 3 different ways to take a picture. An X-ray, which is more of the bone spectrum, a CT scan, which is a scan that gets anything internal, and an MRI, which is a magnetic scan that can get anything, whether that is bones, ligaments, internal bleeding, etc. This rotation had patient interaction, maybe not as much as I would like, but I do believe that it also depends on where you're working. That would define your everyday patient interaction. In this rotation, I saw people of many different ages and many different diagnoses from broken bones, pneumonia, a recent unknown stroke, or even just some follow-up scans. I chose this internship because I wanted to gain a better understanding on if the medical field would be a correct fit for me. My favorite part of the internship was the patient interaction and getting to know your patients. I got to experience this through my rotations with residence, clinic, ATI, cardiac rehab, and a little bit in radiology. I got this best experience of this when I got to be a little hands-on in the ER and hold a 3-year-old boy down. An experience I least enjoyed was the lab because the lab was testing the same things every time you got a sample. This was just a little bit too repetitive for my liking. As to if I'm still interested in this field, yes I am. I really enjoy how in the medical field you're always kept on your toes and caring for people and their families. This experience has influenced my after high school plans because I have found what kind of nurse I need to be, so now I can be guided in what kinds of classes I need to take. I have also always thought about minoring in Spanish, but kind of put that behind me and ignored it until I had an experience in the clinic when I had a patient who spoke no English. If I had to give a future FE student a piece of advice, my biggest piece of advice is to make your experience what you want out of it. Without interacting and asking questions and making the best of your experience, you're not going to find a final result and accomplish your goals for this class. By asking questions, I even found a path that I may be interested if nursing doesn't work out for me, and that is in radiology.